I'm delighted to say Hugh Hendry is with us now, former hedge fund manager, joins us from St Bart's, and Will Caloris is also with it. Never let it be said that we do not get around. Hugh, great to see you. So, these global markets are second-guessing how aggressive the Fed's tightening cycle will or will not be. Recession looks like the price that must be paid to defeat inflation. A lot of noise bugging these markets. How do we position?
The markets are not second guessing. The markets are very convinced that the Fed is conducting another policy error, and that the recession which is on us will be aggravated further by their blindness. And the remarkable aspect of the week that has just passed has been that we received confirmation of this. 2 consecutive quarters of a contraction in the US economy. And I am just spellbound by the conceit and the arrogance of the Federal Reserve, who are now saying, well, actually, we don't think that's a recession, and we'd rather wait on the National Bureau of Economic Research. I mean, good luck on that. These guys take 12 months, to stir the tea bag in the tea. Call me from the future when the NBER reports we're in a recession and the Fed's hiking rates.
Does it get worse then, Hugh? And if we take a step back and use this as an opportunity to take advantage, if you will, of some dislocations in market pricing, then what should we do? How do we do that?
There are no opportunities. What can I say about these markets? These markets wear my wealth like a see-through dress, I want to say. I don't know if it's fear or desire. I think the only thing that can take asset prices higher is complacency. If people kind of wake up and see the political drama, the profits that you report from the energy complex, good or bad, good that you're making profits. But society is at a fracture. Again, in the last few weeks, we just saw the assassination of a former politician in Japan, of all places. I would say to you, inflation is not a monetary phenomenon. The inflation, the higher relative prices that we are seeing today, is not a function of monetary disorder. The banks are not engaged. Private sector banks are not engaged in printing money. This is a function of repeated policy errors, and of course the fact that we had something analogous with a world war with regard to COVID and the blockages and the difficulty of returning the industrial complex and turning it back on. So to my mind, we're kind of like in 1948. I think we discussed that previously. But to me, like here I am in St. Bart's. Do you know what a chauve-souris is? A chauve-souris is the French for a bat. It's a bald rat. That's my definition of the Federal Reserve at this point. I think shame on them. They committed a profound error. During the COVID period, they told a lie. They told everyone. Jay Powell went on daytime TV and he said, we're printing money. First of all, that's illegal. The Federal Reserve Act from the 1930s prohibits it, okay? But because he said it, he owns it, okay? And so that's why they are pushing rates higher. Opportunities. Come back to me first. What do you think? Then I'll tell you about opportunities, or I'll talk about further threats.
Okay, Hugh, just to unpack a little bit of what you said in terms of the Fed not printing money, just to explain for the people watching in the audience, that's a function of the banks. The banks are the ones that are indeed printing money. And just in terms of the inflation, I wanted to touch a little bit more on that in terms of the behavioural aspect, because what we are seeing as well, it's not just necessarily corporates that have to engage in price increases in order to protect their margins in some respect. We are seeing a relative amount of gouging. So how does that end? Because if you're talking about it as a behavioural impulse, it would then be that the only way inflation really ends is if you have people refusing to pay. And in this kind of an environment where you have certain, I suppose, demographics that are able to pay those higher prices, what's the cataclysmic event that stops that?
Fantastic question. So price gouging, okay, but that's quite loaded. But thankfully, we have transparent and independent equity prices where prices are flickering, changing all of the time. Price gouging would suggest excessive super return on capital, and that would reflect itself in higher equity prices. I'm not seeing those surging higher equity prices, and therefore I'm not willing to take on this rather politically charged notion of gouging. Secondly, and with regard to this notion of inflation, to sustain, consumers have a basket of things that they buy every day, be that product or service. Now, if the price of all of those items, let's say, rises by 12%, unless money and the elasticity of money circulating in the economy expands by 12%, then there's simply not the means to support your previous levels of consumption. And that's why we then fall back onto these terms such as discretionary and non-discretionary, okay? So what do you tell the ordinary folk? Do you tell them turn the AC off? Do you tell them eat less? Do you tell them drive less? I mean, here I am in St. Bart's. I'm in a bubble, okay? I have clients that arrive at this gin palace, you know, and they complain that the swimming pool is not warm enough. It is warm enough. They complain that the rooms are not cool enough. They are very cold. Do you see the rich people? I mean, this is class warfare. You know, class warfare being conducted by a blind Federal Reserve.
Hugh, I'm glad you raised all those disconnects. My origins go back to Sri Lanka, and I just came back from Sri Lanka, and I've seen fuel queues that are 4 to 5 kilometres long, people waiting not for hours, but for days. We're in an environment here where, let's bring it back to the UK context, we could have UK households paying £4,000 early next year, average annual household energy bill. Inflation in that environment simply gets worse. Social unrest gets worse. Political challenges get worse. What's the end game here?
People getting angry, you know? So I wear a hat, and it refers back to a statement I made, I think, in 2010, when I said, during the sovereign bond crisis within Europe, I said, I recommend you panic. You know, what should ordinary people do? You should panic. And that's the most subversive thing that one can say, because, you know, your channel and other channels, quite rightly, you parade experts. Please don't think of me as an expert. I'm a beat poet in a tropical island, you know? But the problem with experts is that they are invested in the status quo. What is the status quo? The status quo is doing the same broken thing. Okay, so be subversive, get angry. So in the UK, to your example, people are getting angry. The political leadership is shaking at its roots. They've lost political leadership. They're seeking others. Of course, they offer no solutions. But again, with regard to the permanence of higher prices, I don't think it can be sustained, that ordinary folk will not be resubscribing to Netflix, let me silly, will not be going to the cinema, will be eating less, because they are compelled to pay that 4,000 sterling bill for their energy over the winter. And so it's the cutbacks in discretionary items which will tame the abhorrence of these higher prices.
Hugh, we're about to run into an ad break before we get back to you, but I wanted to ask you something. In terms of something that you mentioned before when you're talking about how the market activity really is leading the Fed around by the nose in some respects, when you have Fed Chair Powell reiterate that there is this likelihood in terms of the dot plots and their expectations that you are going to see an FFR of around about 4% next year, you've got the 10-year printing right now at 265. Are the markets getting this wrong? The Fed impulse to continue to aggressively hike into this kind of a situation?
Well, markets. So as we've seen, July equity markets were higher. I would say sometimes the moon obscures the stars, if you will. July was a lunar movement. What are the stars telling us? They're telling us that the Treasury market is a comfort blanket for risk assets. The problem at the start of this year is that all risk assets, including the risk-free, prices were falling. Over the summer, we've seen some respite. We've seen treasuries actually provide comfort, if you will, to equities. But treasuries have adult problems. The adult problem is that the Fed perhaps is unhinged. It's denying 2 consecutive quarters of contraction, and it's denying the evidence of recession. And it seems willing to continue to raise rates.
We'll wrap it up there for now. Robust conversation we're having, and we'll get back to you later on the programme.